I could feel the goosebumps run up and down my arms. Now, the chill of the data centre was actually pretty familiar to me. I just wasn't expecting to be there that day. If I had, I would have brought a jumper. But as I was standing there in the data centre and feeling that chill and hearing the sounds of the whir of the servers and the server racks and feeling the bounce of the false floor beneath my feet, I was aware of two male voices talking to me about the changes that were going to be happening that upcoming weekend. And all I could think about was, this isn't going to be my problem. I'm not going to have to worry about managing these changes this weekend because I'm not even going to be here. You see, that morning, I had already figured out my escape plan. And as I was getting ready for work, I had my shower, got dressed, did my makeup, packed my bag, and slipped my passport into my handbag. And my plan that day was to go to the office, finish some meetings, tidy up some loose ends, and get a taxi to the airport and buy a ticket on the next plane that was heading out of the country, regardless of where it was going, without having organised a visa, without having told my employer, without having told my family, and without having told my husband. Before I get too much further into this talk, I just want to start off with a bit of a caveat. When I talk about burnout, I'm not talking about depression. They are two very different things. They can be related. One can lead to another. But we do have some chemical imbalances in our brain that happen sometimes that need medication. There are some mental health issues that you cannot therapy your way out of without maybe some medical intervention. So I do want to encourage people that this talk is a mixture of my experience and advice from professionals, but you really do need to go and seek your own help. So let's freeze that frame for a second, and I bet you wonder what on earth had gone on in my life to get me to that stage. What on earth can happen to make me think that the only valid alternative to moving forward with my life was literally leaving the country? You see, past Sonia really loved her job. I liked what I did. I got satisfaction from doing the work that I did. And I took a lot of pride in my work. You know, I'd figured out that day that I was going to go to the office, finish off those meetings, and not leave any loose ends. It's the kind of dedicated person that I was to my role. It was a really strong part of my identity, and it was something that I took pride in doing well. I was relied upon. I was the kind of person in the infrastructure team that you came to when you wanted something doing and you knew that it would get done. I was on call. I'd been part of an on-call roster for the past 7 years. Now, that's not on call every week, but that kind of stuff takes a toll over time. I looked after critical systems. When something went wrong, when we had an outage, it was all hands on deck. You stayed until those systems were up and running, even if that meant working through the night. All of our outages were in the middle of the night that were planned to minimize the impact on our business. In that kind of a role, you are expected and you attract the kind of people who stick with the problem until it's resolved. That's what you need. So all of those kind of factors are sounding like past Sonia was the perfect employee. These are all the traits that we look for when we want someone in an IT role, especially in an operations role. The thing with burnout, though, is that it is a chronic stress. It builds up over time. And just like a match that starts with a small flame that then builds and builds into a raging house fire, that's actually why it's called burnout, because of the time it takes to ramp up and the fact that it can eat away at the inside of that house and leave a shell standing on the outside. I had a neighbouring property to ours that was actually involved in a house fire, and apart from some scorch marks of the smoke on some of the outside of the brickwork, you would not have known from the outside that this house had been on fire, and yet inside it was the smouldering ruins that had affected the structural stability of that house. And that's what we get to when we go through burnout in our jobs. Some factors that can lead to it: family and life. Family can be stressful. It's not always just our jobs that are burning us out. Not having a family can be stressful. In the 12 months leading up to that event, I had gotten married, changed jobs, and bought a new house, and been to 3 funerals of people that I knew who had all died suddenly. It's a bit of stress in 12 months. Maybe you're part of a rock star team, and these are a few of my colleagues in the Microsoft Cloud Advocate space. I tell you, if there was ever the chance to work with a bunch of rock stars, it is the role that I'm in now. These are the people that I sat in the back of the room and watched on stages at Microsoft events presenting and thought, how cool are they? Now, the challenge with being in a rock star team is you can maybe feel like you don't belong. Maybe you're not getting supported. But the thing with rock stars is they make it look easy, because all we see is the finished product. We see them standing on stage delivering the talk and doing the demos and being the thing. We don't get to see their struggles. And when you become part of a rock star team and you build relationships with people who have a public presence at that level, guess what? You get to learn that they spent 3 weeks trying to get that friggin' demo to work. You get to see the effort that they've put in and the failures that they had and the lessons that they learned to get there. And so you start to realize that maybe they're a bit human. And so you need to not compare yourself to that and understand the struggle and the journey behind that as well, because they go through the same stuff you do. Politics, clicks, and sabotage in the workplace. I was going to leave this out of this talk. I wrote it down and I went, this is so like high school Mean Girls, right? We're grown adults, this doesn't happen, right? And then I got pinged on social media by someone who was facing exactly this in the place where she was working, that was making her question that role and making her want to leave her job. It's the undermining of the work you're doing. It's the lack of respect for the opinion you bring. It's not listening when someone makes a decision and you raise an objection. All of those things lead to burnout. Maybe it's an inequality in your work tasks. So burnout isn't always about having too much to do. Maybe somebody gets all the challenging projects and you get left with all the stupid, easy stuff that nobody wants to do. Or maybe it's the rest of the team picks up all the easy work and they do all that stuff and you only ever get stuck with the really hard stuff. That kind of inequality doesn't help either. Or maybe you found out that somebody in the team is getting paid a lot more than you, or they're getting what seems like preferential treatment when it comes to allocating of holidays, for example. All of those kind of things make you question your value and your worth in an organisation. Perhaps it's an unclear vision or direction. Do you know what your team is there to do? Do you know what success looks like? Do you know how you contribute to that success? And, you know, the more I work for big organisations, the more I realise we think big organisations have it all sorted out. Every organisation I work for is kind of making it up as we go along, right? We're trying things, we're failing, we're trying new stuff. That's a little bit different than really not being sure why you're there and how you add value to the company, and that the company actually thinks that you're important. Is it a lack of resources? Again, over time, training budgets get cut, headcount gets cut, staff don't get replaced. Are you being asked to do more with less and in a shorter time frame? It's pretty common in the industry that we work in. Or perhaps the behaviour of the company does not reflect what it says is important. Now, that is our code of conduct that goes up on the wall at the Microsoft reactors throughout the world. And I love the fact that Microsoft puts this boldly as a piece of artwork on the wall. It's not just sent in an email and kept in a dusty folder. It's something that we actively have to walk past when we go into those spaces. But it's not just about this piece of artwork on the wall. Your culture is reflected in the actions that you take and the decisions that you make. And sometimes it's death by 1,000 paper cuts when those decisions and those actions do not reflect what the company is telling you in the HR training it actually values. So, I'm going to introduce you something called the invisible hand raise. Now, I am the audience member who hates it when the speaker says, put up your hand. Put up your hand if you've done this. Put up your hand if for it. Right, that is not my happy space as an audience member at all. But we do it for two reasons. One reason is we don't know you. We don't know the level of qualifications you've got, what part of tech you're in, what experience you've got. And so when a speaker asks people questions, it helps us gauge and modify actually what we're going to say on stage based on the response we get from the audience. The other reason we do it, and it's not quite as well known, but the scientific evidence that if you do a physical action in conjunction with something you are learning, it actually helps your brain to remember it better. If you say something out loud at the same time, it sticks even better to help cement that memory of what you've just learnt. But when I'm talking about stuff like mental health and burnout and these factors, it can be really awkward to stick your hand up with some of the questions that I'm going to ask you, especially if you're sitting with some of your peers or maybe a potential future boss. So, with the invisible hand raise, I'm going to ask you a question, and when I do, I want you to invisibly raise your hand. I want you to picture yourself in your mind raising your hand if you agree with my statement. So, let's go. First question. Raise your hand invisibly if you identify with any of those factors leading to burnout that I've spoken about, that you've experienced in your career. Okay, go. Awesome, thank you. So what does this look like to other people? Surely somebody would have noticed that there was something wrong with Sonia, right? The problem is that we think burnout looks like this. We get this picture of somebody who is obviously stressed, they're overwhelmed, they're not coping. This is what we kind of imagine that burnout looks like. In reality, it often looks like this. It looks like somebody that's put a smile on their face and walked back into the office the next morning because they are relied upon, they do want to do a good job, and they are just going through the motions to keep the wheels turning. That's what burnout can look like. We have this amazing supercomputer that runs this machine that we walk around in. And we actually use 20% of the energy reserves that we put in to fuel this body, fuels our brains, 20% of the calories that we consume. That figure can be a little bit higher when we do things like attend conferences. And so, I don't know about you, but by the end of a day of sitting and listening in different sessions, I'm exhausted. I've done nothing. Like, it's not like I've gone out and run a marathon. I've been sitting in a room listening to people, for goodness sakes. But you know what? Your brain has been working doubly hard processing new information. And it's tired. That physical tiredness that you feel is from your brain working overtime. Now, what happens to this machine of ours when we're stressed is that the cortisol levels rise, that stress hormone, and this little thing inside our brain called the amygdala. Now, the amygdala is not a Star Wars character. The amygdala is part of the control center of your brain, and what happens is when those cortisol stress level hormones raise, your amygdala starts diverting glucose away from the hippocampus and part of your brain and sends it to your muscles for that fight or flight response. It doesn't know any different between mental stress, burnout at work versus there's a lion coming to attack you. So it literally sends more energy reserves away from your brain into your muscles so you can either fight the threat or run away from it. The impact of that is it impairs your brain's ability to convert short-term memories into long ones. That's one of the downsides. The next thing that happens is it depletes the neurotransmitters in your brain that send around the good hormones like serotonin and dopamine. Those feel-good, happy hormones get depleted. And long-term, it actually damages the receptors for those neurotransmitters. So it actually makes it harder to feel happier longer term as well. So the impact of all of that basically means we have trouble following things. We can't see future implications past the short term. And when we're stressed, we make really dumb decisions. It's not the best time to be tackling anything big, but this is the impact. When we need it the most and we're trying to cope with the stress, we're actually a lot dumber, which probably explains a little bit why when I was burnt out, I thought that getting on an airplane and leaving the country was a good idea. Like, doesn't seem so smart in the light of day now. So I want you to talk about, let's talk about some of the things that you can see in your colleagues. We're going to look out for people who are becoming a little bit irritable or they're overreacting. Now, I know some people who are maybe slightly grumpy and maybe very passionate about things that I'm not passionate about, and that's just them, that's their normal. So what we need to do is we need to start almost benchmarking mentally and going and looking for things that are out of character for people. What has triggered somebody to go into a rage about something when that's not normally the norm for them? Are we seeing a decrease in their performance? Are they missing deadlines or having issues with their work? And again, sometimes it can just be that there's stuff going on in life that you're not aware of, but this is another little warning sign. Or maybe they're downplaying their contributions. Maybe when conflict comes up or like robust discussion and arguments in the workplace about something, they're like, it doesn't really matter. They kind of switch off and go, who cares? Are they withdrawing from the normal way that they communicate with the team? Now, in IT, I have found we are not all definitely outgoing people who do all the things and turn up to the Friday night drinks all the time. And some of us are, and some of us are when it suits and when it doesn't. But little things like not participating in the group conversations, going quiet on our chat channels, not replying to the group emails when asked for their opinion. All of those kind of little triggers that says that they're not investing. They literally do not have the energy and the mental capacity to contribute to things at the moment. And what does it feel like if you're going through it? When I was burnt out, my world was pretty much dull and grey. Everything was flat. There was no colour in my life. I did things because I had to do them, and I didn't get enjoyment from anything. I had trouble switching off. And we turn around and say about, turn the phone off, stay away from the laptop. It's one thing to flick a switch on a digital device, but to actually stop this brain from thinking about all the work things that have been going on, that was really a struggle. I'd have an emotional reaction to my phone. If my phone pinged because I got a new email, I'd physically get this reaction to, oh my gosh, what on earth has happened now? What do I need to deal with now? Some people get tremors or shakes. That's that stress hormone in those muscles. I didn't get that, but what I did get was a lot of trouble falling asleep, and that's related to the not being able to switch off, and a monster effort to drag myself out of bed in the morning. And I did, because I went to work and I got the stuff done anyway. But yeah, it was not fun. When we are experiencing these things, it literally is our body and our brain trying to shut down to protect us from what we're doing to ourselves. It just reaches a limit where it goes, I can't do this anymore. So, next awkward question, invisible hand raise time. I want you to invisibly raise your hand if you identify with any of those signs or symptoms that you've seen in either yourself or one of your colleagues. Go. Thanks. So how do you help yourself? If you are starting to see some of those signs and symptoms, what can you personally do about it to help yourself? I'm going to give you 3 easy steps, okay? You ready? Grab your phones. This is going to be life-changing. I want to see this all over social media. Okay. Drink green smoothies, yoga on the beach, and a holiday with bonus points if you take your dog. I wish it was that easy. I really do. Society, we're looking for the quick fix, and I don't know about you, I get bombarded by Facebook ads for, weight loss and calm ads and all these things that are trying to fix my life's problems. I wish it was this easy. There are no 3 easy steps. But I don't want to negate the fact that these things are important. They are a part of the puzzle. First thing that happens when we're burnt out and we're not really interested in anything is our eating habits go to crap, right? We're not interested in getting up and juicing smoothies every morning. So good nutrition goes out the window. Some coping strategies in terms of mentally unwinding and trying getting out of that work state and switching off with some meditation or yoga or whatever also can be really beneficial to some people. And cuddling your dog's always a good thing. The other thing that we say in the society that we live in today is just talk to someone. Like, if you're not feeling that great, if something's off, just go and talk to someone. When I was burnt out, the last thing I wanted to do was talk to anybody, especially not my employer, because guess what? They were putting money in my bank account every month. And the thought of rocking up to them and going, I'm not doing too well right now, knowing that you are funding my paycheck, which is covering my mortgage, was not exactly the thing that I could make any sense of doing. Unfortunately, we are getting more and more employers signing up to programs with strategies to help employees through those kinds of discussions, but it's still not easy. Instead, I want to encourage you to find your tribe. Find the people that you connect with in your world that you know well enough to have a conversation with about when you're not traveling so well. And more importantly, the kind of people in your world that know you well enough to hit you up when they can see that things aren't right in your world. Now, I don't have a big circle of friends, but these are a few of my closest girlfriends that we've met through various things. We don't see each other all the time. We don't see each other in person very often. We're very active on our Facebook group chat, and we know what's going on in each other's world. And so we check in with each other and we make sure that we're okay. The lovely work-life balance term. I want to encourage you to take a longer view of work-life balance. They say we can have it all. We don't need to have it all in the same week. So this photo was my daughter on the ride at Tomorrowland, at Disneyland. And I work and I travel quite a lot. And so I've come to learn that there are times when I'm away from my family. I'm here in Sydney. I'm speaking at conferences. If time zones permit, I can check in with my family once a day. It's a lot harder when I go to the east coast of the US and we're really out of time zone sync, so we don't necessarily catch up every day via Skype when I'm away like that. But in those times, work is my focus. It needs to be my priority, and it is. When we were in Disneyland, I wasn't thinking about work at all. We had such a great family holiday. But the reason that Disneyland happened was because one day my husband went out on his bicycle and he came home a lot earlier than I expected, and he climbed back into bed and he was cold. It was a cold morning in Brisbane. And I said to him, what, that's like the shortest bike ride ever, what's going on? And he said, I was stopped at the lights, not far from home, and this motorbike pulled up in the lane next to me. And I turned my head to look at this bike. He said, and I think I've put my neck out. He said, I've got this like shooting pain down my neck here, and I've got a cracker of a headache. He said, I think I've like pinched a nerve or something. And I'm like, okay, stay in bed. I'm going to give you 20 minutes and we'll see how things are then. By the time 20 minutes had passed, he hadn't fallen asleep and he'd started vomiting. And I said to him, you've got two choices. You can try and put some clothes on and I'm taking you in the car to the hospital, or I'm calling an ambulance. And he went, just take me down to the doctors. Like, I'm sure that it's just my neck and they'll put it back. And I went, look, if we go down to the local doctor's office and they're not sure what it is, the first thing they're going to want to do is an X-ray or an MRI, and they don't have that there, so we need to get referred to a radiography place. And I said, no. I said, get in the car, we're going to the ER. I went to the emergency room, sat in the waiting room. I don't know how long time had passed. Doctor brings myself and my two daughters into the room. My husband's lying there on the bed with all these lines in his arms and all the monitors beeping. And he said, so we've done a scan and your husband's got a bleed on his brain. And I went, pardon? He's like, that's not the news you were expecting, is it? And I went, no, it's not. He said, we have him stable. We're keeping his blood pressure as low as possible. We're monitoring his minerals and his salts and all the things that we do in these cases. We have a referral through to the emergency hospital, the other big hospital where they do the neurosurgery. And we're just waiting to get confirmation on which of the two Brisbane hospitals we need to transfer him to. Right. If your loved one ever goes in an ambulance from one hospital to another and there are a doctor and two nurses that go in the ambulance with them, that gives you kind of an indication of how important this was. That all kicked off from about 6 a.m. By 5 p.m. he had had a dye contrast scan. They'd confirmed where the bleed was. They decided that the only course of action was to crack open his skull and do a craniotomy and go in there and clip the bleed. And they did. And he didn't lose consciousness once. And he survived and recovered perfectly. And today he's back riding his bicycle. And you would not know, except for when he gets his hair cut a little bit shorter, that he's got this really cool craniotomy scar. But you know what? We had always said that one day we would take our kids to Disneyland. When I was 15 years old, my parents had worked and saved so hard for so long in New Zealand. And they took myself and my 7-year-old sister to Disneyland for a family holiday. And I said, one day I want to bring my kids back to this magical place. And so we'd said, one day we're going to take our kids to Disneyland. And when your husband ends up having a brain aneurysm and recovering from it, you kind of realize that you might not have a one day. There are some things in life that can throw you curveballs like that. And so we did what most good families do. We called up the travel agent, we put the trip on the credit card. And we went to Disneyland and we had the best time. We've since paid off the credit card, just in case you were wondering. But I just say that story to remind you about what is important in life and the fact that sometimes work is a priority, sometimes family is a priority, sometimes they mingle. I'm not a 9-to-5 worker person. I am very conscious of how much time I'm spending on my phone in front of my kids. Do you figure out what works for you in terms of balance? Schedule your rest. We are really good at planning things. We plan our deadlines, we plan our work schedules. We don't tend to plan our own lives so much. So I don't want you to come to the end of the financial year with your boss knocking down on your door to say that there's annual leave that you haven't taken. Get the calendar out. Mark in the dates where you're going to take some leave and take it. Move it if you have to, if something comes up with work. But I found we've got a caravan now and we go out just for the weekends. We sometimes just do 2 nights away. But if I don't go and put that in the calendar and actually book it, we get to November and I go, where's the year gone? how did we get to all those things that we said that we were going to do? It just doesn't happen. Schedule your rest, stick a meeting in your calendar, and make it happen. Shape your other interests outside of work. That's really hard when you're passionate about work and you love your job, because I did, and I do now. But this is a photo of me volunteering with the SES. And with the SES, it was something that took me completely away from a computer, completely away from my family, and I got to train every night with an amazing group of people from all walks of life that came together to help the community. It was so much fun. When we weren't looking for missing people or putting tarps on roofs after storms and tropical cyclones up in Cairns or far north Queensland, we did things like community events where we got to hang out with stormtroopers, and we carried Darth Vader around on the stretcher. It was hilarious. Now, that was a thing for me to have an interest outside of work. Since I've started this role with Microsoft, I travel a significant amount, and I got to the point after volunteering with this organisation for 13 years where I was resenting having to turn up on a Tuesday night. We train every week, except for over the Christmas break when we're on call because it's storm season, right? And so I made the very hard decision to step down from being a volunteer with the SES. I was a team leader, I was a qualified trainer, and it just wasn't working for me anymore. So I said goodbye. It was both the hardest and the best decision I've ever made. But it's about recognizing the seasons in your life and doing what works for you when it works for you. And it got to a point where it didn't work for me anymore. Now, I haven't yet found another interest outside of work. I've actually since I put this slide together, come to think of it, I now volunteer with Red Frogs. And the cool thing about Red Frogs is that we're in the local area where I am. We have a partnership with one of the big hotel pub venues. They do a lot of live events. They do a lot of like one-day music festivals, big foam party, New Year's Day, all of that kind of stuff. So I'm now trained with the Red Frogs as one of their volunteers, and I go and look after very drunken teenagers when it suits me. So on a Friday night, if I'm in town and I have the capacity, I can go down there and help out in my community when it suits. Don't have to rely on trying to fit it into my schedule all the time. IT people like data. We like facts and figures. We like stuff that we can measure. We're not so good on this, how are you feeling type stuff. So take a look at this website. mycompass.org.au is a really good benchmarking tool. And what you can do is you can go there and answer these questions and move the little slider. And the great thing about doing that is that if you do it now, then if things change in your world, if you're going through a rough patch, you can go back in and see how that's moved. Or if you decide to implement some strategies to change or improve your life, again, you can go back in there later and see how you are now faring compared to your benchmark. So mycompass.org.au is not very well known. It's a good little tip. The other thing that I've adopted that I stole from a cloud advocate at Microsoft, who stole it from another cloud advocate at Microsoft, I think we've traced it back at the moment to Scott Kate, who was the originator of this, is putting this on the bottom of our email signatures. Now, it's really fun working in a global remote team. You know, my team are working all hours of the night when I'm sleeping. They're working on my Saturday morning. And we have this permission slip that when I send somebody an email, if they choose to read it outside of their working hours, I'm letting them off the hook. I'm saying, I don't expect you to reply immediately. Just because I've sent you an email now because I'm working, doesn't mean that you have to immediately reply back to it. Don't use email for immediate things. And so we have this, don't feel obligated to reply outside of your normal work schedule. This is my favorite. Tame the digital attention seekers. Now, I am not going to lecture you about screen time and how much time you spend on your phone because I'm one of the world's worst. I'm very active on Twitter, and my phone is an extension of my identity. But I do have some strategies that I use. The interesting thing about phones is I had a conversation with a Buddhist monk. And this Buddhist monk turned around and said, he was talking to somebody about something theological. And this Buddhist monk turned around and said, that's a great question. I don't have the answer right now. Let me research it and get back to you. Can I have your email address and I'll send you an email? And this person's like, Buddhist monks use email? And this guy laughed and he went, yeah. He said, when we go into the monastery, he's like, drop all our worldly possessions, get our set of robes and a MacBook. It's like, what? He's like, technology is amazing. It is this tool that lets me research things, it lets me reach out to people around the world, but it's a tool, and we use it like a tool. If you've got a nail that you need to hammer in, you go and you get your hammer, and you hammer in the nail, and you go and put the hammer back in the drawer. That's how a Buddhist monk uses their laptop. They know what they want to use it for, they get it out, they use it, and they put it away again. They don't walk around with a hammer in their pocket the entire day just in case they come across a nail that needs banging in, right? What's your notifications? What is getting your attention on your phone? Now, on my phone, Microsoft Teams chat pings me because quite often I'm with my team and that's how we communicate when we're at events. SMS messages ping me. The phone ringing pings me. That's it. Nothing else on my phone gives me a visual or an audio notification that it has new information in it. One of the things you'll notice, this is my home screen. This is the actual picture of my home screen. Okay? It does not have any work apps on it. It does not have Facebook on it. It does have Twitter, because like I said, I'm a little bit addicted to that one. But even Twitter does not have a badge on it to tell me that there's a notification. That's another tip. Turn off that unread badge. Check stuff when it suits you to check it. If you need to be contacted about something urgently, have another process in place for urgent stuff so you don't have to be constantly checking your apps. The unread badge came about because I woke up one morning on a Saturday and my Outlook said 20 unread messages. I was fairly new, we were a new team. We weren't the kind of team that would need to be getting 20 new emails overnight at that stage. I could get it probably a little bit more now, and I looked at it on my Saturday morning and I'm like, I can't ignore that app. What the heck has gone on in my world that my team have needed to send 20 new emails while I've slept? I could not go through my day knowing that that was sitting there without going in and checking my email. And so now, I call it Pavlov's inbox. Schrodinger's inbox. Schrodinger's inbox means that there's new emails in it or there's not new emails in it, and I don't know until I actually go and open up the box and check. Airplane mode. It's not just for airplanes. Airplane mode is my secret weapon of when I really need to focus on something. I put my device on airplane mode and it cannot ping me to tell me that there's something going on in the world. My notifications are suppressed anyway, but airplane mode's really good. And finally, I want to issue to you a morning challenge. Now, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand and tell me who checks their phone first thing in the morning before they put their feet on the floor. I won't embarrass you like that. The problem with doing that is that you rob your brain of a chance to wander. We don't have free time for thinking anymore because we're constantly checking the information on these devices. And so I made a decision that when I wake up in the morning, I would not check my phone, and my phone goes on airplane mode when I sleep. I would not turn my phone off airplane mode until after I've had a shower. That means I've put my feet on the floor, I've said hello to my family, and I've managed to have a shower with my brain completely free to wander of what I'm thinking about before I've figured out and seen what the next new email is or what the news headlines are. I've got some free thinking time before I've stuffed it with information of stuff that it needs to be thinking about. And then I can take it off airplane mode, sit there and have breakfast, check my work emails, catch up on all the news and do that kind of stuff. I don't know what's going to work for you, but I want to encourage you to find a marker in your morning routine of when it's okay for you to go and check your phone. Give yourself a little bit of a break and a downtime in the morning first. Record your successes. Really good come performance review time when your boss wants to know all the good things that you've been doing. But it's also really good as a pick-me-up when you doubt yourself, when things are getting a bit too much, for you to go back into that folder in your email or the notes you've made in OneNote where you've gone, I actually am making a difference. There are a few people who have said I've done a good job, I helped influence this thing, I delivered that on time. Keep a note of those successes and celebrate what makes you unique. It can be really hard to try and evaluate your self-worth against other people. It's a natural thing to do, but nobody else has lived your life. Nobody else has had your experiences and they don't have your perspective because of that. And that's important. Understand that recovery takes time. I said that burnout is a chronic stress. It's a combination of things building up over time, but recovery takes time too. You're not going to fix this by taking a week's annual leave and leaving your laptop in the office, okay? It's going to take time. Restructure your work. Have a chat to your boss about maybe working some days from home, changing projects, changing your role in a project, whatever it takes. So recovery from burnout isn't always about completely stopping what you're doing and withdrawing from it. Sometimes it's just a little bit of restructuring and rebalancing things so you can still feel like you're contributing. And just be aware that it can come back. So coming out of burnout doesn't necessarily mean that you're cured forever, hooray. You can change jobs and 2 years later be going through and finding that you've got still some of those same signs and symptoms cropping up again. Just watch for that rebound. So now we've looked after yourself. You've put on your own oxygen mask first, just like the airlines tell us to, because if you're not in a good state, you can't save anybody else. How do we help other people? What do we do if we find our colleagues and our co-workers going through that? Number one, be a good example. Be the person who takes the annual leave. Be the person who sends a message out to the team that says, I've just had one of those weeks, I'm going to finish at lunchtime on Friday, or I'm taking Friday off. Okay? Do the things that you want your team members to be doing. Be a defender. If you see something that you don't believe is right, if you think a decision is wrong, if a workload is too much, even if it doesn't immediately affect you, speak up, because other people in the team might be feeling the same way or might be feeling worse about it and don't have the energy to fight for it as well. Close feedback loops. One of the things about burnout is the feeling like you are banging your head against a brick wall when you're trying to bring up issues and you're not getting listened to. And one of the ways that we can circumvent that is by making sure that we get back to people about the things that they've raised an issue about. Okay? Sometimes it's a case of there's nothing we can do about it and this is why. I tend to find, I use a philosophy of first seek to understand and then to be understood. And I have a philosophy that when a decision gets made, I normally am just seeing the tip of the iceberg. So I'm not aware of all the factors underneath that went into making that decision. Doesn't mean I always agree with it, but there's sometimes a bigger picture there. But what we need to do is make sure that people know that it's important and that it's valuable for them to come with their suggestions and their ideas and their criticisms and their issues, because even if we're not going to change anything, we are going to listen. And the more that we can explain why we need to stick to that decision and that's the way it is, people go, okay, I can live with that. I understand that now, but at least you've made me feel like what I've said was important. Value everybody's contribution. And it's not so much about everybody's contribution, it's more about every type of contribution. So it's really easy to turn around and go, this person is amazing because they speak on stage at conferences and they did 25 conferences this year. Like, that's kind of an easy one. But there are so many roles and so many contributions that go into the work we do that don't get as highly praised or aren't as publicly visible. Really good testing, amazing documentation. All of those kind of roles that we just kind of expect people to do that we don't quite often stand up and cheer as loudly about. So give everybody in their roles the ability to get a pat on the back for the good work they're doing, even if it's something like documentation, which is probably actually one of the most important. But it doesn't get shouted out about as much as public speaking. And I want you to start stomping out superhero statements. I have to catch myself when I say stuff like, I'm so busy. And when we get people that turn around and say, I have not slept for 36 hours because I've been working on this production issue. On one hand, there is recognition that they went above and beyond and they've put in the effort. But I want you to use things like, that's terrible. What can we do to make sure that that never happens again? Okay? Recognize the contribution, but let's stop raising up as heroes this kind of long-term effort. This is the thing I did. It's important to value the effort that people did, but we need to flip it on its head. We get that with the emergency services volunteering, and you'll see it in the news. If we have a big storm event, they'll go, the SES have received so many calls and they've been working for 3 weeks. And I go, I really hope they've got a good fatigue management plan and people have been taking their breaks. You know, here is so-and-so Mr. SES person who has been out firefighting or whatever, and his home has burnt down in the process. And I'm like, that's terrible. There's no way that person should have been out volunteering. And the system and the processes should have been in place to turn around and say to him, you go and look after you and your family. That's your priority. This is the kind of way that we've got to flip this sort of superhero approach in our industry. Because burnout isn't a badge of honor, but it's not a badge of shame either. Talk to people and call them out in private. If you see with one of your colleagues that things aren't quite going to plan, talk to them now. When you talk to somebody and you bring this up in conversation, you're going to get an answer. That answer might be that they don't want to talk about it, and that's a valid answer. But you've got to be prepared for the what happens next. If someone turns around and says to me, yeah, my world's falling apart, say, great, I asked you the question, you give me this answer, like, now what the heck do I do? And that's where a lot of these employer programs are coming in to help as well. And it might just be that you need to listen and then talk to your manager or reach out to your HR program. But I'm going to give you a couple of strategies to ask the tough questions. And so I know we have this great organisation called Are You OK? And we encourage people to ask each other if they're OK. If you had asked me if I was OK when I was suffering from burnout, I would have said, yes, I'm fine, because I didn't want to talk about it. So here's a couple of more concrete examples. Things like, I've noticed you're not quite yourself lately, can we talk? Okay, that is opening up the conversation to say, I think there's something not quite right here. Can we talk? If they say no, guess what? That's the end of the conversation. It is not your job to save the world, but at least somebody else outside of their circles has acknowledged that there's maybe something not quite right there. Tell me specifically what happened last week. These kind of questions are a lot more effective than the just, how are you feeling? Okay, tell me what's happened. And how are you feeling about next week? So not so much the how are you feeling right now, but what is on the horizon in your immediate future, and how do you think you're going to deal with that? So this is a slightly more effective structure to have a conversation, especially if it's one of your peers. Another effective thing is looking at what matters the most to you in this situation. Now, at any one point in time, there are a few things that our brains are looking for and craving, and these change over time, and these change depending on the circumstances. And so at any point in time, we are either looking for meaning, that what we're doing matters. We need to feel like we belong and we're valued as part of a team. We need to feel secure that our world is stable. And sometimes, on the flip side, we might be looking for some more freedom and some more flexibility. Or maybe we're thinking that what we contribute doesn't have any value in the big scheme of things. So these are the kind of things psychologically that make us feel happy and connected. And sometimes it can be that we're feeling really restrained and constricted at work and we want the freedom to go and experiment. And this came about, there was a case with a manager and employee, and he noticed some sort of signs and symptoms in her that things weren't going quite well. And so they sat down and they talked about work and what was going on at work. And he went, okay, so let's cut down your hours. You can do a few days working from home. And every time they kind of did that, things weren't improving. And he's like, I don't understand. Like, I'm doing all of the things that I think I should be doing. The problem is that he was putting himself in her shoes. And we talk about walking in other people's shoes. Don't do that. It's still you. You're just wearing different shoes. So we need to find out what's important to the person. And so he had this kind of a conversation, and he said, what matters the most to you right now? And she said, I don't feel challenged. The stuff that I'm doing is mundane, and I don't get a chance to sink my teeth into some really sort of knotty problems and technical stuff. And I'm just getting bored. And it kind of feels like if I disappeared and left this team tomorrow, nobody would even notice because the stuff isn't even important. So he started giving her the hard work. He put her on the longer term, trickier problem solving, do the research, fix the thing, and she loved it. And she absolutely shined. So find out what matters the most to that person as you help them. So now we get away from the invisible stuff because this isn't a particularly awkward question. And I think it's important to see a commitment in this room. I would like you to raise your hand if you are prepared to implement one of the strategies that I've talked about or anything else you've got in your head to either help yourself or to help somebody else that you know. Go. Thanks. Always gives me goosebumps. Okay, so let's wrap up. How did I get from having my passport ready to book a flight out of the country to now being in this industry over 20 years with a blimmin' Microsoft logo on my shoulder? Like, what? It's a bit of a journey to get from there to where I was today. And I don't have time to go into that, except this was the next step for me. I walked out of that data center. I found a meeting room that wasn't being used, and I walked in and I sat down and I closed the door. And I got my phone out and I called my husband. And I said to him, I don't know what you're doing right now, but you need to stop, you need to come and pick me up, and you need to take me home. Thank you.